Hello, and welcome to this special quick lecture on cladograms. This is for the class tomorrow, and I'm hoping not to run too terribly long before you get to celebrate your new knowledge of cladograms. So, cladograms. Remember, these are the diagrams that show the relatedness between different organisms. We looked at family trees, and we talked about the shark and the fish and the frog. Now we're going to go into a little more detail. So, what are the four aspects that are used to determine the evolutionary pathway of a species? You may want to take notes, even though it's on the next few slides, but if you write stuff down, it'll help you remember it. Okay, the four aspects that are used to determine the evolutionary pathway of a species include, remember how we previously already covered fossils? We looked at transitionary forms, what things look like in the past that seem to have led to the form in the present. Similarities in body structure. When you compare the horse and the zebra, you see that they have a lot of features that they share, even though they are not the same species. DNA similarity. I may have mentioned a little bit about DNA. We're looking at how similar their DNA sequences are, or how much homology. That's a term we're going to use more later on. And then we can look at protein structures and compare those between different organisms. Now, I said four here. There's a fifth one that we talked about a little bit, and that was early developmental arcs, how they change through their growth phases. All right. Now here is an example of a little cladogram looking at raccoons, lesser pandas, giant pandas, and bears. All four of these organisms have a common ancestor. These are sometimes called branching diagrams, and they show the phylogeny, or evolutionary history. They are also called phylogenetic trees, more especially when you include the DNA sequences in there. Now by this, you see the branch points. We have one here. Raccoons and lesser pandas share a recent common ancestor. Giant pandas and bears share a recent common ancestor. And all four share a single common ancestor from which all these other types of pandas and bears and raccoons derived. Now by the name, remember we talked about naming a little bit, why Linnaeus's binomial nomenclature caught on so well. Because lesser pandas and greater pandas, you would think by their common names that they are more closely related than, say, lesser pandas and raccoons for sure, or bears. So here the giant pandas and bears, they have a recent common ancestor, and I'm not sure what feature this was exactly, but we're going to talk more about features here in less than a minute. So why do we use cladograms? Now we talked about models and how these models are useful in showing how different organisms are related. There are three specific purposes to a cladogram. So yes, we are showing common ancestors, and we can show shared features and show how closely one organism is related to another. You're seeing this in a nice visual display. So here's an example of some different traits in a cladogram and how these paths diverged based on having or not having that particular trait. We have our sharks, which we talked about, and we have our fish and amphibians. But here on this diagram, we see we can extend that to primates, rodents and rabbits, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds. Now the traits at each of these branching points or nodes that these common ancestry lines split off are shown here. And so above this, other branches, we're talking about animals that don't have vertebrae. And what are some animals that don't have vertebrae? Well, let's take, I don't know, the sea star, the echinoderms, insects, many other animals do not have vertebrae. So they would all be before this point somewhere else. So after we have vertebrates, there was another split between bony skeletons, and then these are ones that, like the sharks, that have cartilage. So we have this split off here from this branch point. So this is the most recent common ancestor for all of these ray fin fishes, amphibians, primates, rodents and rabbits, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds. Because fish, remember, are not tetrapods. We looked at other animals that were tetrapods in when we're looking at the fossils in the transitionary forms. So here is our branch point for our tetrapods, which do include us. Amphibians, primates, so these are all the animals that are tetrapods. Now what separates amphibians from everybody else is having an amniotic egg. So for the age-old question, which came first, the chicken or the egg, this cladogram clearly demonstrates it was the egg. Now from here we split off to animals that have hair, which goes down the roads of mammals, which is where we are. And over here we have preorbital fenestra, separating out our crocodiles and our dinosaurs and their bird descendants, inheritors is what I was thinking of. All right, so this is a cladogram that separates some pretty big traits here. Now, if we look at something in a little more, well, not quite more detail, but here now we have sharks, a little simpler of a model to talk more about, are sharks, frogs, kangaroos, and humans. So what separates, let's take frogs from kangaroos and humans is in this cladogram we're looking at the trait mammary glands. So kangaroos and humans both have that. What separates kangaroos and humans is the placenta. Remember, kangaroos, they're joeys when they were born. They have to crawl into the pouch and latch on there and finish their development. Whereas humans and basically all the mammals up here are able to grow to being able to be born with a little more complete. So, but all these again have a common ancestor. So this branch point we're looking at vertebrates, but tetrapods go off this way. And then here we have frogs split off, mammary glands going this way. And then we have kangaroos here, and humans have mammary glands, and then we separate out with the placenta. So here we go. This diagram shows a relationship between four relatives. These relatives share a common ancestor at the root of the tree. Now this does give you a relative indication of how old the species are, but it is not does not tell you, like the exact age or exactly how long ago. Because remember that tetrapod piece spanned, what, 50 million years or so? So these four descendants at the top of the tree are different species. That's called speciation. So this is not humans derived from kangaroos or humans derived from frogs or humans derived from sharks. These are common ancestors, so these are not these final species. All right, now if you take that same kind of information and put it in a table, you have these four animals and these four characteristics. So back up here, so 1, 2, 3, 4 vertebrae, 4 limbs, mammary glands, placenta. So here, our first branch point, so sharks have vertebrae along with everybody else, but they don't have 4 limbs, don't have mammary glands, don't have a placenta. And our next branch point, number 2, now we have our frogs. Yes, these are all tetrapods, but they don't have mammary glands or a placenta. And now when we get to 3, the next branch point, we have mammary glands shared, and the kangaroos don't have a placenta. And then humans, there we go, we're placental now. So let's look at this one together. So this is the hagfish, perch, salamander, lizard, pigeon, mouse, and chimpanzee. So what animal does not have a jaw? As you can see here, jaws appear after this branch point. So the trait having a jaw didn't appear until after this, the common ancestor for all of these animals in this cladogram. So if we follow this branch out, we see we're at hagfish. Hagfish do not have jaws. All these other animals do have jaws. Now, which animals have lungs? So we follow the traits down, and we have a branch point here. We have our perch. Perch have gills underneath that bony operculum there. And all the animals after that in this diagram have lungs. So some salamanders do, some salamanders don't. Salamanders can be a little bit more complicated. There are some salamanders that have no lungs, they have no gills. So there's always going to be, when you make a model and you're simplifying things, there's going to be exceptions to some things, outliers, but mostly salamanders do have lungs. And let's go. So which animals are probably predators? Well, what would you say was a definition for predator that we're going to use here is having claws or nails. That's what we're going to go with, saying they're hunting. And those salamanders are happy to eat insects, so are perch. But we'll call claws or nails the thing that separates out predators. So everything down here, the lizard, pigeon, mouse, and chimp, can be considered predators. So that brings us to the conclusion of this piece about cladograms. Hopefully this gives you an idea how we can look at most recent. So between the mouse and the chimp, there was they had a recent common ancestor here. And here's the trait that split off for feathers. And we have mammary glands and fur when we get into mammals. Hopefully this will give you a basis from which to work on when you take your celebration of knowledge. For those of you that will be seeing this in the classroom, and that will be available or may already be available in Google Classroom. So I look forward to seeing you Monday. Have a great weekend.